Anna adjusted the strap of her apron, her fingers trembling slightly as she placed the silver tray on the kitchen counter. She had worked in many grand homes before, but none as eerie as this one. The mansion was breathtaking, with marble floors that gleamed under the chandelier's soft light, and hallways so long they seemed to stretch into infinity. Yet despite its beauty, something about the house made her uneasy. It wasn't the size or the silence. It was the woman who lived inside, Mrs. Holloway. From the moment Anna started working there, she noticed something strange. The millionaire's wife never left the house, not once. The other maids whispered about it in hushed voices, but no one had an answer. Mr. Holloway, on the other hand, was rarely home. A powerful businessman, he was always traveling, attending meetings, or dining with important people. But his wife? She stayed locked away, hidden behind the heavy curtains of the master bedroom. At first, Anna assumed she was sick. Maybe she had a condition that kept her inside. But as the days turned into weeks, she started to see the truth. Mrs. Holloway wasn't just staying inside. She was trapped. The realization crept up on Anna slowly, like a shadow stretching across a room. As the sun set, she noticed how the other servants avoided talking about her, how the chef always prepared meals that were sent up instead of being eaten at the dining table, and how the master bedroom door was always locked from the outside. One evening, while dusting the grand staircase, Anna heard something, a sound so faint it barely reached her ears. A whisper, a plea, "Help me!" Her heart pounded as she turned toward the master bedroom. The door was closed, as always, but now she was certain Mrs. Holloway wasn't staying inside by choice. Someone was keeping her there, and Anna was determined to find out why. Anna's pulse quickened as she stood frozen at the bottom of the grand staircase. The whisper she had just heard sent chills down her spine. She looked around, but the house was as silent as ever. The ticking of the large antique clock in the hallway, the only sound breaking through the stillness. Had she imagined it? She turned her gaze back to the master bedroom door, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. Everything in this house was pristine, carefully maintained, but the air inside carried an unspoken heaviness, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. She had been working here for over a month now, and every day the feeling grew stronger. The other maids never spoke about Mrs. Holloway. If Anna ever asked questions, they simply shrugged and busied themselves with their tasks. It was as if she were a ghost, someone they all knew existed, but never acknowledged. That night, as Anna lay in her small room on the servants' floor, she found herself unable to sleep. The whisper echoed in her ears. Was it truly Mrs. Holloway? If so, why would she ask for help? The next morning, Anna decided to pay closer attention. She moved through her daily chores carefully, watching and listening more than usual. The house ran on a strict routine, with every servant assigned to specific duties, ensuring there was little overlap. Anna's job mainly involved cleaning the lower floors, polishing the expensive wooden furniture, and dusting the countless shelves lined with books that no one ever seemed to read. She was rarely required upstairs, but today she took a risk. After finishing her assigned tasks early, she carried a fresh set of linens up to the second floor. Her heart pounded as she approached the master bedroom. She hesitated outside the door, balancing the stack of sheets in her arms, and pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. She raised her hand and knocked lightly. No response. Gathering her courage, she turned the handle. As expected, it was locked. She took a deep breath, stepping back quickly as footsteps echoed down the hallway. It was Mrs. Hayworth, the head housekeeper, a sharp-eyed woman who ran the household with an iron grip. She stopped a few feet away, her expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "I was just bringing fresh linens," Anna said quickly, lowering her gaze. Mrs. Hayworth studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the other end of the hallway. "That won't be necessary. Go back downstairs. Now." Anna nodded and walked away. But she could feel the housekeeper's eyes on her back the entire way down. That evening, she noticed something else. Mr. Holloway had returned. His deep voice echoed through the halls as he gave instructions to the staff. He was a tall man, always dressed in expensive suits, his presence commanding. But what struck Anna the most was how easily he moved through the house, as if he owned not just the walls, but the very air within them. She watched from the kitchen doorway as he sat in the dining room, reading a newspaper while sipping from a crystal glass. A meal had been set before him, though he barely touched it. The room was dimly lit, the glow from the chandelier casting long shadows across the table. After a while, Mrs. Hayworth entered and leaned in to speak to him in hushed tones. Anna couldn't make out the words, but she saw the way Mr. Holloway's expression darkened. He placed his glass down with deliberate slowness and turned his gaze toward the hallway, toward the stairs leading up to the master bedroom. A knot formed in Anna's stomach. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he carried himself, the way he never mentioned his wife, never showed any concern about her well-being. Later that night, Anna decided she couldn't ignore her instincts any longer. She had to know what was happening behind that locked door. Waiting until the household had settled and most of the staff had retired for the night, she quietly made her way back upstairs. The hallways were dark, the only light coming from the moon shining through the tall windows. Her heart pounded as she reached the master bedroom door. Once again, she took a deep breath, pressing her ear against the wood. This time she didn't just hear a whisper. She heard quiet sobbing. A lump formed in her throat. With trembling fingers, she reached for the doorknob, even though she knew it was locked. But just as she did, she heard something else. A creak from behind her. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing at the end of the hallway was Mr. Holloway, and he was watching her. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with Mr. Holloway. The dim hallway light cast sharp shadows across his face, making his expression unreadable. He stood still, his presence filling the space with an unspoken warning. "What are you doing up here?" His voice was calm, almost too calm, but there was something chilling beneath it. Anna scrambled for an excuse. I thought I heard something. I was just checking if everything was all right." He took a slow step forward. "There's nothing for you to check. Your work is downstairs." Anna nodded quickly, lowering her gaze. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." But as she turned to leave, she caught something. Movement from under the door. A shadow. A soft rustling sound, like fabric shifting. Someone was definitely inside, and they weren't asleep. Mr. Holloway didn't move until she had stepped past him. Only then did he turn, watching her as she hurried down the stairs, her hands clenched into fists to stop them from shaking. That night, Anna barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the locked door, she heard the muffled sobbing, and she felt the weight of Mr. Holloway's stare. The next morning, the house was quieter than usual. The staff moved about their duties, avoiding conversation. Anna could tell something was different. Then she heard the news. Mrs. Holloway was gone. One of the maids whispered it while scrubbing the marble floors. Another confirmed it while setting the breakfast table. She had disappeared in the night, they said. Vanished. The master bedroom door was found unlocked this morning, but no one had seen her leave. Anna felt cold. She didn't believe it, and then she saw it. Mrs. Hayworth standing by the grand entrance, speaking in hushed tones with Mr. Holloway. The housekeeper nodded, then quietly handed him something. A single gold bracelet. Anna recognized it immediately. She had seen it before, on Mrs. Holloway's wrist the day she arrived. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. By midday, police officers arrived at the mansion. They asked questions. The staff provided their usual rehearsed answers. But Anna, she couldn't stay silent. When one of the officers pulled her aside, she took a deep breath and told them everything. The locked room, the whispers, the sobbing. Mr. Holloway watching her in the dark hallway. The bracelet. The officer listened, carefully, his expression serious. Then he nodded and stepped away. Within the hour, the quiet mansion erupted into noise. More officers arrived. Mr. Holloway protested, but it didn't matter. They searched the house, and then they found her. Mrs. Holloway wasn't gone. She was hidden, locked in a small windowless storage room near the master bedroom. She was weak, but alive. The truth unraveled quickly after that. Mr. Holloway had kept her trapped for months, controlling every aspect of her life, ensuring she never left or spoke to anyone. He told the staff she was ill, made sure no one questioned her absence. But the night before, when Anna had gotten too close, he had decided to move her somewhere else before anyone could find out, but it was too late. Anna stood frozen as she watched Mrs. Holloway being carried out, wrapped in a warm blanket, her face pale but free. She turned slightly, her tired eyes meeting Anna's. And in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. She had heard her. She had helped her. Mr. Holloway was taken away. The mansion, once filled with cold silence, now buzzed with movement. The other maids whispered, their fear now replaced with relief. As Anna stood in the grand hallway, the weight on her chest finally lifted. She had come here as just another servant, another nameless worker in a house full of secrets. But she was leaving as something else, someone who had listened, someone who had acted, someone who had made a difference. And as she stepped outside, breathing in the crisp, fresh air, she realized one thing. She would never ignore a whisper for help again.